So welcome to the Successful VISTA Supervisor, your first 5 plays. In today's session, we'll review the roles of a VISTA Supervisor and introduce you to the resources on the VISTA campus that support you in those roles. We'll also highlight some resources important for you, important for your VISTA members to help them find their way through their VISTA service year. And you'll want to know about all of those resources so you can direct your VISTAs accordingly. As I mentioned, my name is Andy King. I'm a training specialist here at AmeriCorps VISTA. I'm joined today by Suzanne Knisner and Rebecca Starr, who are helping to support us in the technology of today's session and to help get your questions answered. Our main presenter for today is Carly Bruder. She is herself a former VISTA supervisor. She also served as a VISTA member and a VISTA leader. And currently she works here at AmeriCorps VISTA as a training coordinator. So I'm going to turn it over now to Carly.
Thanks, Andy, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. We know that you are incredibly busy people, and particularly that this is a very busy time of year. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and be here for this webinar. And in the chat, we ask you to feel free to share what you're setting aside or multitasking right now so that you can take the time to be here with us for this presentation. Like Andy said, I am a former VISTA leader and VISTA supervisor. So I know the ins and outs of everything that you're going through as a supervisor and how I can best support you as a staff member. And I'm really excited and happy to be here to do that today. So quickly going through today's agenda, we're going to introduce the supervisors area of the VISTA campus and then run through your first 5 plays as a VISTA supervisor. Whether you recently attended supervisor orientation or are joining us today and have not yet gone to orientation, you are likely to have a very full to-do list of VISTA supervision and some questions for us as well. No matter what your supervisor role is, this webinar is designed for you. We have designed this session based on common requests from sponsors and supervisors. Throughout the session, we'll highlight important concepts, provide tips, and show you resources on the VISTA campus to help you plan important first plays for project success. And of course, we've built in plenty of time for questions and answers, so please you can, at any time, put a question into the Q&A box, or at the end, we're going to open up the phone lines to take your questions over the phone as well. In your confirmation email, you also received some supplemental materials and a note-taking guide for this session. After the webinar, we'll be sending you a follow-up email that has a complete list of the links and resources that we showcased today in this webinar. So we will send you all the materials so that you can follow along with us on today's presentation. To start off, we're going to take a look at the VISTA campus and several sections within the campus. Depending on which state manages your VISTA project, where your project is based, you might also have access to a campus page that has been created specifically for your state. If you can contact your state office to find out if that is available in your state. So this is the landing page of our VISTA campus. It's divided into sections for VISTAs, supervisors, as well as VISTA leaders and alumni. The supervisor section is what we're going to show you now. So you are going to click on that section. We do encourage you to create a username and password to log in. You can enter as a guest, but it is of limited access as to what resources you can utilize. So we're going to log in here. And this takes you to your VISTA Supervisor Campus landing page. If you've already attended supervisor orientation, you learned about the terms and conditions of VISTA service and specific ways that you can support VISTAs at your organization. You also learned about the VISTA assignment description, or the VAD, that you will provide to each of your VISTAs, and you began to plan your on-site orientation and training for your incoming members. In fact, you probably received way more information at training than you were able to absorb. absorb. And some of you were unable to attend supervisor orientation or have not yet attended. So that's why we provide the VISTA campus to you. This is a place where you can find all the materials that you need to make yourself and your VISTA successful. Please feel free to post questions in the Q&A box, like I said, and you can access that by clicking on the green tab at the top of your screen. We'll also pause for questions throughout the presentation. So this is the landing page of your VISTA Supervisor section of the campus. As you can see in the center, we have the Life as a Supervisor section. We're going to be going more into this in a minute. We also have your Connect with Supervisor section here. This is a place where you can post questions, respond to other VISTA questions, and share resources with each other. In the middle of the page, we have our announcements feed. Periodically, VISTA headquarters will send out important announcements. Those announcements will be sent to you through other channels as well, whether it's the Gov Delivery email system, your state office, but they're all posted here so that they're archived. And then we also at the bottom have our top resources section. These are the most commonly accessed resources on the VISTA campus, and our one-stop shop, which is a grab-and-go spot for all of the resources that will get you up to speed. On our sidebar, we have our search tab, and this will search the entire VISTA campus. So if you're looking for a resource or have a question, you can type it in right here, and it basically is a Google search function, and we'll give you all the results. We have our calendar of events. Any day that's highlighted in blue means we have an event on that day. So we don't have any more events coming up this month, but you can see previously we had a webinar on writing powerful impact statements and MLK Day webinar on volunteer recruitment and retention. Under that, we have the campus tours and training. You can click on here to find information about more sessions like this one. We have a handy link to the Supervisor's Manual, which is your go-to resource. And then we have our campus catalog, which is quick links to find what you need. At the top of the page, these icons on the right-hand side here will give you quick links to the VISTA Leaders homepage, VISTA Alumni homepage, VISTA homepage, and the Supervisors homepage. So now we're going to go into the Life as a Supervisor section, and this is your Supervisor desktop. It's your entry point for information, resources, and tutorials specifically for sponsors and supervisors. This section gives you access to over 100 resources that have been designed to support you in your VISTA supervision. We'll visit a few pages today, but I encourage you to explore more on your own. So let's check out the roles and responsibilities of a VISTA supervisor section. In here, you'll find information about the big picture and getting started, as well as everybody's favorite topic, reporting and evaluation. And within reporting and evaluation, we have directions on how to complete a sponsor verification form, step-by-step instructions for completing the federal financial report, and other resources and guides that are available to you. We also have examples of templates that might be useful to you, and instructions for VISTA progress reports. Within the coaching and supporting section, we recently conducted a long-term assessment of VISTAs and found out that supervisors play the most important role in the success of a VISTA's year. And so we really want to help support VISTA supervisors because we know that they're the folks who make our VISTAs most successful. So if you need information about successful relationships or problem solving, you can come in here. And again, we have resources and talking points and common retention challenges for VISTAs. We know that supervisors face challenges throughout their year, but they're frequently not the first to face that challenge. So we have some folks who have shared their experiences, and you can find that here. Recruiting is another topic that supervisors need help with, as well as the VISTA assignment description, the VAD that I mentioned earlier. And within here we have information both on writing and adapting VADs, and there are also some template and example VADs that we think are excellent models that you can utilize if you're having trouble getting started writing on your VAD. So now that you've been introduced to the supervisor area of the campus, we're going to head back to our presentation and look at some specific plays for project success. So your first play, play one, orchestrate onboarding and on-site orientation and training activities. This is all about orientation and training, better known as OSAT. Onboarding and OSAT are important because they help the member settle in faster and provide the member with the basic knowledge and skills needed to get started on the project. We want to take a look now at some typical onboarding activities for VISTA members. We want you to ensure that the basic needs of your VISTAs are addressed. That includes housing and familiarity with the community, and including community resources like banks, doctors, grocery stores, even where's a good place to get a cup of coffee, where do folks in your office like to go for lunch. Things of that nature can really help your VISTA ease into the transition of starting a new job and get to know the local community faster. We also want you to facilitate the VISTA settling in at your site and in the community, including workspace and office structure, welcoming them into the larger organization, and introductions to a VISTA leader if you have them. A great activity for VISTAs to explore their local community can be an independent community investigation. Directions for that activity can be found in the OSAT checklist, which is on page 76 of the Supervisor Orientation Workbook, which you got at Supervisor Training or is located on the VISTA campus under the Roles and Responsibilities section. And again, don't worry about writing all this down. We're going to be sending you the links and everything that we've talked about in a follow-up email at the end of this presentation. A variety of on-site orientation and training information, including sample agendas and activities, are available on the campus, and we wanted to share just a few tips and reminders. Scheduling of OSAT should be timely enough to provide the members with immediate information and skills needed to begin their job. But remember that this can also be an ongoing process and can be spaced out through the first few weeks or even months of a VISTA service. Depending on your structure, on-site orientation and training can be delivered in a variety of formats, including group format. You can bring VISTAs together. If you have multiple VISTAs, you can bring them together in one location and deliver OSAT to a group of VISTAs who are serving all at one location or at multiple locations. You can do group plus site, meaning you would bring together a group of VISTAs for a portion of OSAT that pertains to everyone, but ask each of the sites to provide site-specific orientation for the members as well. Site only, which designs and delivers OSAT specifically for members serving at their site. If you only have one VISTA member, this would be a one-on-one on-site orientation. You can do distance learning, so it can be used for initial OSAT meetings or ongoing training. You might be managing a national project or statewide project, and it's not feasible to physically convene everyone on a regular basis. So you could use conference calls, video conferencing, Skype, WebEx, or Google Hangout to conduct distance training and support. And one-on-one, you can choose to orient members one-on-one. And remember to use a framework that's consistent if you have multiple members. So if you're going to be doing one-on-ones with one member, you need to do it with all members so that everyone is providing the same level of training. A customized member handbook for your project is also a really useful tool for all formats of OSAT, and a sample of that can be found on the VISTA campus. That would include any policies and procedures or information that's specific to your site and your VISTA project that's important for your members to know. A few final reminders about OSAT. Plan to submit training plans and evaluation results to your state office by the agreed upon date. Your state office should have let you know a deadline for expecting that information. Talk with your members about the content and usefulness of the OSAT and enlist their help with adjusting the plan to meet their needs. Nobody knows what they need better than they do. So ask them what they're struggling with, what they need more information about, what they need assistance with. And brainstorm with them ways to make OSAT better for future VISTAs if you have VISTAs coming on next year, or you might have a few onboarding periods throughout your year. So now I just quickly want to point out some OSAT resources that are available on the campus. Here we have a screenshot of the campus, and you can, I know that some of you have already spent time designing your on-site orientation and training plan, but there are many additional resources to help you support that plan. Again, sample agendas and checklists are a good starting point if you're new to OSAT or if you want to revise or strengthen your current plan. Under the orientation elements, VISTA offers guidelines and checklists. In planning and design, you can find a worksheet, template, and sample agendas. And under delivering orientation, you can find tools for making your event more interesting and exciting. Although I'm sure you have all designed incredibly interesting and exciting OSATs already, because we know that our VISTA supervisors are incredibly creative and passionate people, so we don't worry about you that much. We're going to move on to play 2 now, which is coach your members to successfully utilize the VISTA campus. Remember that supporting your members doesn't end with onboarding and OSAT. Your second play is about helping members make connections to campus resources. The VISTA member area of the campus has tools to support VISTAs throughout their cycle of service. So we're going to head back to the VISTA campus now, and I'm going to show you a few resources there. So we'll go to the VISTA homepage. We would love, as you know, VISTA members attend pre-service orientation before starting their service, and we would love to continue to bring VISTAs together throughout their year to provide them ongoing training, but we just don't have the means to do that right now. So we think of the campus as our virtual gathering place for VISTAs so that they can continue to learn and grow and support each other and network throughout their year of service. A couple of weeks after PSO, new VISTAs are expected to participate in a webinar that guides them in planning their professional development, and that session builds on the individual development plan that the VISTAs created at PSO. The VISTA member section of the campus is designed to follow the life cycle of a VISTA year. So the Life as a VISTA section assists members throughout their life cycle from onboarding to transitioning out of VISTA. They start with the aptly named Starting VISTA section, which includes courses and resources that are required for review prior to committing to service. These resources cover VISTA benefits, policies, procedures, civil rights, and where to access resources. So we want everyone to know what they're getting into before they fully sign up for VISTA service. The member handbook can be accessed at any time on the left-hand side of the page, similar to how the supervisor handbook is available in the supervisor section. As VISTAs navigate through their year, the work section is filled with resources to support tasks in the member's VAD and provide professional development opportunities. For example, if your VISTA is tasked with fundraising or partnership building, they can find resources and ideas here. So they maybe have never done fundraising before, but we have VISTAs who have done that a lot, and they've provided different examples and resources and tutorials and courses on these topics. You may also consider assigning certain sections of or tutorials on the campus to your VISTAs as part of their ongoing professional development or their OSAT plan. And you can also encourage your VISTAs to connect with each other throughout their service year in the Connect with VISTAs section of the campus. Here they can add their PIN to the VISTA map so that other VISTAs and alumni can see where they are, and the map allows them to find other VISTAs and projects and allies in their area. Once folks are logged into the campus, they can message each other through this interface by accessing member profiles. The VISTA forums also allow folks to engage in conversations and ask questions and help each other find resources. Posts are visible to all campus users, and they cannot be deleted, so it's never a bad idea to remind your VISTAs on what proper netiquette entails. This section also includes links to VISTA's social media outlets and information about accessing in-person networking opportunities through Meetup, and that information is all here at the bottom of the page. As members bring their year to a close, they may want to focus on the Life After VISTA section, which is back here, Life After VISTA. This section can help them plan next steps after service, such as using their education award or the non-competitive eligibility NCE status for VISTA that they can help use to find employment with the federal government. Moving over to the VISTA Leaders section, I know that you might not all have VISTA Leaders on your project, but this is, even if you don't have a VISTA Leader, there's lots of resources that are useful in here for you. In the Getting Started section under your first few weeks, you can check out the Building Relationships VCASTs, especially the guidance given to leaders around working with members in the building relationships with VISTAs. Especially of interest to supervisors and to VISTA leaders is the products of the Action Learning teams. These are resources that have been chosen by the Action Learning teams to provide more information about. So you can click here on Team Products, and these are all challenges that VISTAs and supervisors have faced that a group of VISTAs have spent a few months addressing and providing resources. So there's all kinds of information on effective practices for VISTA leaders, VISTA online resources, a leader stress guide, as well as a supervisor's guide to finding and selecting terrific VISTA leaders, life after VISTA, and effective VISTA supervisor relationships. So even if you don't have a VISTA leader, this is a really useful section and information that is available to you in the VISTA section. So we're going to pause now to see if there are any questions in the chat panel. Andy, come up.
So far, we haven't had any questions come in. We did get a great tip about related to OSOT. So if you have ideas or suggestions for things that you're doing that maybe some of your colleagues might want to hear, feel free to post those in the chat. So thanks, Carly.
All right. Thanks, Andy. So moving along now, we're going to talk about Play 3, which is set a schedule and process for reporting. Again, reporting is everybody's favorite part of VISTA. I know you're very excited to be talking about this. So we're going to spend just a little while focusing on reporting and some time recapping the reports that are required by CNCS and share some new tips to help you write those reports. This slide lists when reports are due. All of these reports are submitted through eGrants, and if you have any questions about your exact due dates, you can connect with your state office and they will be able to tell you the exact due dates. The project progress report includes multiple sections. The two main sections are performance measures and the narrative. Performance measures include details on how your project is progressing, and narratives are an opportunity for you to share challenges, successes, and any other information of note. You can also attach and link to press clippings, flyers, letters, or other documents related to member accomplishments when those are available. Some tips for completing the progress report. Keep good records during the year starting from day one. It's a lot easier if you keep track of everything as you move along instead of waiting until the quarter or mid-year point to look back and consider what you've achieved. Involve members and sub-site supervisors, if applicable, with the data collection and reporting. Schedule plenty of time to write your reports and leave yourself extra time in case something comes up. Organize all the documents you need for reporting before you get started. Do not leave anything blank. Writing NA as a response is not acceptable as an answer. And new projects that do not have VISTAs on board yet may not have much progress to report on project end goals. Instead, you should focus on describing recruitment and other startup activities. One other tip I have is any narrative writing that you're doing, be sure to do that in a Word document. eGrants does have a timeout feature, and if you haven't saved your work, you could lose it. And there's no spell checking word processor feature in eGrants either. So it's really simple to write something in a Word document and then cut and paste it over into eGrants when you're done. Resources and templates for involving members in reporting can be found in the Working with Subsites tutorial, and more tips for writing can be found in the Supervisor's Manual on the VISTA campus. Some best practices for reporting in the project plan section include remembering that a clear, concise project plan is the key to good, simple reporting. To keep reporting aligned with your original project plan. At the mid-year, if you have not fully reached project milestone, report on your progress to date and if you feel that you're on track to meet your goal at the end of the year. Include statistics in reports, not just descriptions, and include real numbers with your percentages. For example, if you're saying 75% of respondents said our program is awesome, and you could say that that was 45 out of 60 respondents, although 100% of your respondents would say that your program is awesome because we know that it is. The next report that we're going to talk about is the VISTA Progress Report Supplemental, also known as the VPRS. This is a report that is due annually and focuses on capacity building activities. If you need a refresher on capacity building and how it differs from direct service, you can check out the VISTA History and Mission section of the VISTA campus to learn more. The VPRS is used to measure the quantitative information about all VISTA projects, but programs will only report on areas in which they have been working. You want to talk to your state office to determine what data you are expected to collect and report on. In eGrants, there is a screen for each of these categories. You are provided with the key definitions for each of them. For example, under resource development, you are asked to fill in the dollar value of cash resources developed by the VISTA and the dollar value of non-cash resources developed by the VISTA. Again, if that's not something that your project works on, it's okay to put zeros in this section because we recognize that not all of these measurements will be applicable to every VISTA project. So now we're going to head back over to the campus and take a look at some of the resources on the campus for reporting. So in the Supervisor section, to find resources for involving VISTAs and subsites in reporting, you want to visit Life as a Supervisor. Roles and responsibilities. Remember we said reporting and evaluation was in here, but also working with subsites is in here. So you're going to click on working with subsites, and further down within the working with subsites course, on the left-hand side you will see involve VISTAs in reporting. And these are some examples, PDFs of examples of reports or member presentations for reporting. You can also find additional information under Life as a Supervisor, Roles and Responsibilities, Reporting and Evaluation. And this is where the bulk of the resources on reporting are. There are information on the Federal Financial Reporting Form, how to complete a VISTA PPR in eGrants, PPR being the Project Progress Report, a blank copy of the report, and everything else that you need to know about reporting. We are working on a new mobile app for member reporting, and that's coming soon. And that was actually an outcoming result of one of the VISTA Leader Action Learning teams that I had mentioned earlier. Another great place for resources on reporting is the National Service Knowledge Network. This specifically has resources on performance measurement. All projects are expected to report on CNCS Goal 3, which is maximize the value we add to grantees, partners, and participants. So you'll be expected to report on capacity building and leveraging resources. Under Goal 1, you might fall in line with economic opportunity, education, healthy futures, or veterans and military families. The site includes lists of measures, guidance, and online training in the resource section under Performance Measures Core Curriculum. So you can check this out and learn more about performance measures and alignment with the CNCS strategic plan. Again, we're going to be sending out the link for this. And again, remember to connect with your state office to determine your final list of measures. So we'll head back to our presentation. And at this point, we're going to open the line for any specific questions about reporting.
For those parties on the phone line, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone, unmute your line, and clearly record your name. One moment for the first question on the phone line.
Great. And if you're not listening by phone but streaming the audio, you can ask your question through the Q&A feature in the lower right corner of your screen. And we'll wait just a minute to see what questions may come in.
There are no questions on the phone line at this time.
All right. Thank you, Jose. I didn't see a question come in on the Q&A, but I know one question that frequently comes up is around those performance measures. And there are a lot of them. And so, Carly, if you could just say, you know, how many of them should people be reporting on? And do they have to put something in for each one of them? Or can they leave some of those performance measure items blank?
Thanks, Andy. And to clarify, this is specifically in talking about the VISTA project report supplemental?
Yes.
Okay. So like we mentioned, there are a few slides back. There are a number of reporting measurements on the VPRS, the supplemental, and some of these may not at all be applicable to you. So we understand that, and you should work with your state office. It's most likely that your project will be able to report on at least 2 or 3 of these, just given the nature of the information we're asking for. I do encourage everyone to don't leave things blank. Put in a 0 because that acknowledges that you've read the question and looked at it and you didn't just skip over it by accident. So you do want to actually enter something even if what you enter is a 0. But again, talk to your state office about specifically what you should be reporting on. But know that if you're answering at least 2 or 3 of them, you're really on track.
Great. Thanks, Carly. And at this point, we have no other questions. So we'll move ahead and then, of course, have more time for questions at the end.
Great. So what we're going to do now is move into Play 4, which is Become a Pro with eGrants and My AmeriCorps. So this is your chance to ask questions about the system, and we're also going to demonstrate some common tasks that you might be asked in order to complete. So I'm going to share my screen now and get logged into an actual eGrants account. But while I get that set up, if anyone has specific questions about eGrants, how to do something, or a function that they would like to see, feel free to ask that now in the Q&A section, and Andy will let us know if we have any specific questions regarding eGrants. Otherwise, I will just give you my whirlwind tour. So Andy, I'm going to go ahead and feel free to interrupt me if questions come in over the Q&A. But you should all be somewhat familiar with this page. This is your eGrant homepage landing page. This is where all of your information that you submit to CNCS is stored. There are kind of 2 sides to eGrants. One is your grants and applications screen, which is here. And then under that, you have your My AmeriCorps portal, which is where any member actions will take place. So again, eGrants is the CNCF web-based system where you manage your project. You all should have a unique username and password and the proper user roles so that you can do all the functions necessary in your role as a supervisor. Usually those involve reporting and recruitment roles. Some of you may also have access to budget roles, or that may be someone else in your organization who has access to that. So now I want to take us into the portal home. And again, this is where you will do all of your member functions. So you're going to click on portal home. And if your computer is as slow as mine, you'll just wait for a minute and hope that it works. Let's see. And of course, it doesn't want to cooperate today. So now it's cooperating. Okay, here we go. Well, it seems like the member side doesn't want to work with us, so we'll go into the grant side as well. So what you would do is click here under View All. Your organization may have multiple projects or grants through the Corporation for National and Community Service. So you may have state and national grants, you may have senior corps grants, you may have VISTA grants, and your project or your organization may have grants going back several years. All of those will appear here, so it's important that you make sure you're working from the correct grant. So for example, we're going to pretend that we're working with this grant, which is a VISTA grant in West Virginia. And this is where you could view your grant. If you had any amendments that you needed to make to the grant, you could initiate an amendment here. You could do your renewal or your continuation application from here as well. And we're going to go back to our homepage because we're going to talk about reporting now. And that's in the lower right-hand corner here. Your financial reports, your progress report, and your progress report supplemental. Your progress report supplemental is only due once per year, so if it is not available here, that's okay. It just might not be the season for supplemental time, but you'll see all of your supplemental all of your reports are cataloged here, so you can see your supplemental progress reports for this project going back to 2008. And then here's where you'll click to do your quarterly or biannual progress report. And we will go into this report, which for this project is due in February. You will walk through these sections. You can either click directly onto the section or click the next button to navigate. And again, when I mentioned quantitative numbers, if that number does not apply to you, you can feel free to put 0. Don't leave anything blank because we might think that you accidentally skipped over it or didn't see it. Here in the narrative section, there's a really nice feature, which is that if you haven't entered in any information, your box will show up as orange, and once you've entered the information, it'll change to a green checkbox. So it's a really easy way to review that you've entered your information. And again, I encourage you to write all of that information in a Word document and cut and paste it over to eGrants. Your final screen lets you review everything, and then you would hit Submit here, which I'm not going to hit. So I'll go back to our home page and see if we can get into our portal home now. Here we go. Great. So this is where you're going to do all of the activities related to your VISTA members. Recruitment, VAT assignments, exiting members, anything that needs to be done. So when you are accepting applications, pending applicants will appear here in your work basket. So this person has 1,466 folks who want to be a member of their program, which is great. you would click on an applicant's name, and that would allow you to view their application. And you could learn all about them by clicking through the different sections. Again, you want to make sure that you read their motivational statement, their skills and experience, their education. You, as a supervisor, may also request additional information from a VISTA applicant. You might ask for a copy of their resume or their cover letter, but please keep in mind that when you select an applicant and forward them on to the state office only sees this application. So the state office is only approving this person as suitable for service based on their application and your sponsor recommendation. So please make sure that you're turning in thorough applications and also thoroughly detailed sponsor recommendations forms. So please use complete sentences. Please, give detail. Every applicant has weaknesses. Again, writing not applicable is not acceptable on any CNCS form. So keep that in mind. And then at the bottom here is you would hit submit and send this application to your state office for approval. Because this is a pretend account, that function is not available on this application, but that's okay. So you would also in here have your recruitment work basket. You would also have your service opportunities, and this is where you create or edit the opportunities that you post for your VISTAs. So you might have a VISTA and a VISTA leader position. The great thing is that if you post a VISTA opportunity one year and you go through all the detail of typing in the information for that position, you can just change the dates or check that you're not currently accepting applications for that position, but the listing is still stored in your eGrants account so that next year you can go back and say, great, we need to refill this position because Bobby's, wrapping up his VISTA service year. It's time for year 2 of this position, and put the posting back up. And then under VADs is where you would create and track the status of your VADs to see that they're being approved. So if you want to create a VAD, just here at the bottom, you click on Create a New VAD. And here you can keep track of all of your current VADs for their project period and the numbers of members on them. Are asked to submit every other week to verify that the members that are listed on your project roster are correct. So what you're going to do is, let's go to the most recent one. So you'll click on the report, and it will give you a list of all the members on your project with their start date and their end date. If that member is currently serving on your project, you do not need to take any action. If that member is not a member on your project or is no longer serving on your project, you would want to click on the drop-down box next to their name and click on the appropriate action for that member. So if they left the VISTA project because they've accepted under other employment, because they have an unanticipated program and they're returning to school, whatever it is, and then you would hit save. And you can keep track of all your reports and how often they are certified on time or late, which is, we'll say, delinquent. So those are the highlights of eGrants. Andy, did any questions come up in the chat about eGrants?
No, surprisingly, nobody had questions about eGrants. So this is either a very advanced group or they're just shy about asking those questions. But I do want to remind you, if you have questions about eGrants, you can use the Q&A feature in the lower right of your screen. Or if you want to ask by phone, you can press *1. Record your name after the prompt, and Jose, our operator, will get you on the line.
I think we just have a group of eGrants wizards on the line today. I think that's what it is.
That's great to hear.
um, so if there are no questions at this time, we'll head back to our presentation. And we will move on to play 5, which is promote sub-site success. This section could also be entitled promoting site success. So even if you don't have sub-sites to manage, you still need to carry out these tasks to ensure a successful project year. The first tip we have is share your overall project plan, including your targeted goals and performance measures for each site. If you are an intermediary agency, please share the overall project plan with each of your sub-sites, and also share it with your VISTAs. Frequently at pre-service orientation, VISTAs want to know, how does my role as a volunteer recruiter at this organization fit in with the overall project plan that my organization has for, just our organization itself, or the county at large, or the nationwide project that we have going on. Also, clarify expectations for high-performing sub-sites. Make sure that everyone is on the same page and is clear on expectations for communication and reporting and deadlines and everything else that's coming up throughout the year. Also agree on communication methods. What's the best way to get a hold of you? How do you want to be receiving information and reporting notifications? Is it email, over the phone, face-to-face, or site visits? Set up an orientation schedule and let your sub-sites know of any mandatory meetings that are taking place, whether those are in-person or virtual meetings. That's really important. And plan an orientation for new supervisors and returning supervisors if needed. Member placement and management is also incredibly important. You should ensure that the knowledge of VISTA's rules and regulations, as well as the terms, conditions, and benefits of VISTA service, are well known by all of your sites and sub-site supervisors. Articulate your recruitment and placement protocol and procedures. Share VISTA members' applications and their biographical information. Refine and revise VADs as needed. Know that VADs can be updated throughout your year of service. You might write a VAD 3 or 4 months before a VISTA member actually starts, and there could be several changes within your organization. You might be awarded a huge grant that brings new resources to your organization. You might lose a staff member that was supposed to supervise a VISTA, or you might have a VISTA that comes in with a unique skill set that you weren't anticipating, and you want to work that into the VAD. So know that your VADs can be reviewed, revised, and updated, and just connect with your state office about that. And like I mentioned before, our research and recent study has shown that coaching and supporting is the key to member success. So set up that relationship from the get-go with your VISTA and let them know that you're there to support them, how you prefer to communicate with them, and everything else that they need to know for the year. Establish who they should contact if they need assistance with member issues, whether it's the VISTA leader, yourself, someone else in the organization, or as always, the VISTA member support unit is there for questions. VISTAs who receive supervision and coaching are the most satisfied and successful VISTAs. They gain the greatest number of competencies compared to other types of training. 70% of alumni who met one-on-one with their supervisor at least once a week of members who completed their year of service successfully, 70% met with their supervisor one-on-one at least once a week, compared to only 52% of those who terminated early. So lack of strong supervision is definitely a cause in VISTAs terminating early. So we want your VISTA to be happy and successful in their VISTA service, as do you. So please know that your role as a supervisor is critical in ensuring that success. So we've reviewed the layout of the supervisor campus sections earlier, but let's take a look at a few specific resources to support your success. There is a tutorial on working with subsites that you can access from the left-hand navigation or through the Roles and Responsibilities section. Under Roles and Responsibilities, go to the sub-site section where you can find directions for updating VISTA site addresses in the portal. It's really important to update the site addresses for each member so that the VISTA is listed in the right geographic location for reporting. You can work with your state office if you have questions on this or need more information about how to update a site address. In 2004, the process will be updated so that you can select the site location at the time that you accept a new VISTA candidate, and you won't have to kind of go in after the VISTA has already been accepted and update it. You'll be able to do it from the get-go. We mentioned earlier being familiar with the terms, conditions, and benefits of VISTA service. If you need a refresher on that, you can check out the Life as a Supervisor section, Roles and Responsibilities, and then Member Policies. You can take the full course, or you can download the key points for a quick reference, and this is also where you'll find the Civil Rights course, and the Member Handbook is also on this page. And the VISTA assignment description section has a variety of resources on writing and adapting the VADs. We also earlier took a quick tour of the coaching and support section, which has a variety of resources on enhancing your coaching skills, including several tutorials on successful relationships. The tutorials do include VISTA-specific scenarios from real-life examples and solutions to common sticking points and retention issues that VISTA projects encounter. You also have another priceless resource available to you, and that's each other. Utilize the Connect with Supervisors area of the campus to talk with your colleagues in the Supervisor Cafe Forum. So at this point, we're again going to open it up for any questions that you might have.
And just as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question by phone, you may press *1. And when prompted, please record your name so that we'll know who you are. If you want to ask a question online, use the Q&A feature, which has just shifted a little bit, but should still be towards the bottom of your screen. So we can wait just another minute to see what's coming in. In the meantime, I do want to let you know that we have an upcoming series of webinars for VISTA supervisors starting in January. So our first topic will be recruiting, how to attract successful VISTAs. That will be on Tuesday, January 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be sending out emails with specific information about that session as well as others. And on the campus where Carly showed the VISTA calendar, or the supervisor calendar, you'll see all of our events listed there as well. All right, so it looks like we don't have any other questions coming in at this time. So if not, I want to thank you for your participation. And we look forward to seeing you on one of our future webinars that you can see listed there. So thank you very much, Carly, for a great presentation, and thank you again for participating.